So, the Rite of 7 Degrees operated in London, England, during the late 18th century. And despite its rather ordinary and unpretentious name, it was a rite that presented an array of exotic high grades and had a direct French influence. Indeed, the rite was organized and run by a French immigrant and was meticulously conducted in French, at least in its earlier days. The rite became connected to the Lodge of Perfect Observance #1, a lodge that operated under the Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent, a Grand Lodge formed under the initial guidance of William Preston that came under the overall sway of the Grand Lodge of All England held at York during the years 1779 to 1789. However, as we shall see, the rite was in function before the Grand Lodge was constituted, and its influence continued long after the Grand Lodge had come to an end. Indeed, according to Masonic historian W. Wonnacott in his article for AQC in 1928, there may be some things that point to the origin of the Baldwin Rite when examining the Rite of 7 Degrees. And certainly there are some grades from the rite that were practiced in the early part of the 19th century, and something that we will explore a little later. The Rite of 7 Degrees itself consisted of an elegant collection of high grades that Wonnacott suggested originated from the French-based chapter of Claremont, which, after an intense rivalry with an order known as the Knights of the East, a compromise was achieved and an order called Emperors of the East and West was born. With the high standard of degree work and the noble sounding chivalric titles, it managed to secure ascendancy in the Grand Lodge de France in 1767. The rite was brought over to London around this time by the French soldier Pierre Lambert de Lintot, the Hawk grades attracting inquiring Freemasons who held the desire to journey down a more esoteric pathway. A number of French-speaking lodges had operated in London previously, and it didn't take long for de Lintot to acquire a lodge and create a chapter. In 1779, the Lodge of Perfect Observance #1 became one of the 3 London-based lodges that operated under the short-lived, spurious Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent, though it was the only lodge to actually work the Rite of 7 Degrees via its attached chapter. The Lodge of Perfect Observance was, on the whole, made up of Frenchmen, some having been members of some of the aforementioned French-speaking lodges that had met in London. Though as the 1780s progressed, there were some notable English names on the membership list as well, as members from the European countries, all the European countries, joined. There were also some well-known aristocratic names associated with the rite, such as the Prince of Brunswick and the Prince of Hesse-Kassel. Pierre Lambert de Lintot and his rite were given a brief mention by John Yarker in his Arcane Schools. Yarker referring to how Lambert de Lintot, who was past master of Lodge St. George of Observance, had for many years been working the 7 degree system of the French Templary of Claremont, ostensibly as an agent of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. This theory that de Lintot was a Jacobite agent had also been put forward by Arthur Edward Waite in his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and has more recently been mentioned by Marcia Q. Souchard, though no evidence has yet come to light to firmly substantiate the claims. However, later on in my book, I do actually outline that this wasn't true, because in the minutes, which we transcribed and placed in the book along with the transcribed ritual, de Lintot actually states that he has nothing to do at all with the Bonnie Prince, so to speak. So even in his lifetime, these rumors must have been circulating, and he was moving away from those and switching his, or confirming his allegiance to the Hanoverians. So I will now list the 3 lodges that actually performed the Rite of 7 Degrees. And I shall start with the Lodge of St. George Observance, number 148. And this was constituted on the 16th of August, 1736, at the Sun on Fish Street Hill. And that was in London. It once had the name of St. George de Unamity and was changed to the name St. George de l'Observance in 1777. Wonnacott states how de Linto joined this lodge on the 20th of January, 1779, becoming senior warden before becoming its worshipful master, serving for 5 successful years. However, as we shall see, the lodge had transitioned into the Lodge of Perfect Observance by the closing months of 1779. And as discussed by Wonnacott, after the Grand Lodge ended 10 years later, this lodge transitioned back to the Lodge of St. George of Observance, just to confuse matters when you're doing some research. And this continued to promote the high degrees for a time. Indeed, the Lodge of St. George l'Observance could be found operating with a Haradim Royal Chapter of the Grand Lodge and Chapter of England south of the River Trent, under the Charter of Perfect Observance, Perfect Observance, number 1. And that is indicated by the final minute entry, which was dated July the 26th, 1794. So we do know that that being the final minute entry, that the Rite of 7 Degrees was surviving till that particular date, and it probably, in all consequence, lasted a bit longer. So this appears to imply that the title of the Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent was still officially being used by the members at this particular point in time, mainly in the form of their original official charter of 1779. The lodge, however, can be seen as being officially erased in February 1794, according to Lane's Masonic records. De Linto died sometime in the late 1790s, possibly in 1798. So by this time, the rite in its original format had probably ceased to work. So the second lodge I'd like to introduce you to that practiced the Rite of 7 Degrees was the Union Lodge number 270. Which was, according to Wonnacott, originally the French Lodge number 331, which had been constituted on the 29th of January, 1765, at the old Bell Savage in Ludgate Hill. And Wonnacott states that the warrant was illegally sold to de Linto and his friends in 1766, being renamed and renumbered. Again, just to confuse the researcher even more when they're looking at these lodges. So it was this lodge that developed a chapter for the high degree work. When examining the minutes, a strong relationship can be seen between the Union Lodge number 270 and the St. George de l'Observance Lodge, with numerous brethren from St. George being admitted into the high grades of the chapter attached to the Union Lodge. Wonnacott observes that the Union Lodge then merged with the Lodge of St. George, as indicated by a minute entry in May 1778. Although the chapter still worked the high degrees, but was now connected to the new lodge. It was this alliance of the Lodge St. George de l'Observance and the chapter that transitioned into the Lodge of Perfect Observance the following year. And thus we have a rather fluid and extremely flexible structure of lodges that merge and transmute to suit the needs of the brethren. So the third lodge, which I'd like to bring to your attention and discuss, is the Lodge of Perfect Observance number 1. And this was constituted at the Mitre Tavern in Fleet Street on the 15th of November, 1779, and became the only lodge and chapter under the Grand Lodge south of the River Trent to practice the Rite of 7 Degrees. There were actually 3 lodges under the Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent. There was the Lodge of Perfect Observance, and there was one half of the Lodge of Antiquity, which was one of the 4 lodges that formed the Premier Grand Lodge in 1717. That's if you believe the 1717 date and not the 1721 date. But what happened with the Lodge of Antiquity was that it basically split in half over a disagreement, where William Preston was wearing regalia after he was walking back from a church service back to lodge, and half of the brethren in the lodge disagreed with that, and the other half stuck with William Preston. So you get this split that happened in the lodge, and one half of the lodge stayed with the moderns, and the other half formed the Grand Lodge south of the River Trent, that was basically joined onto the York Grand Lodge. So as you can see, it's very confusing. It does help to have a chart to indicate all these different dates and all these different splits and renumbers of lodges. And these, of course, are part of the many pitfalls of Masonic research in the 18th century. So, going back to the Lodge of Perfect Observance, number 1, there is a minute entry dated the 15th of September, 1779, which describes this transition. And it says, the chapter of Herodom, in union with the Lodge St. George de l'Observance, makes alliance with the Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent and receives charter at the hands of Frere Wilson for the Grand Master. And that was signed by Lambert de Linto this year under the title of Perfect Observance number 1. So basically we have a transition of lodges. So this entry clearly indicates that the Lodge St. George de l'Observance and its associated chapter, which was originally attached to the aforementioned Union Lodge, became the Lodge of Perfect Observance, a brand new lodge with a brand new name under the new Grand Lodge. Indeed, the Rite flourished within this new context, and according to the minutes, the Rite was extremely popular, attracting Freemasons from both the moderns and the ancients, as well as Masons from Ireland and various European countries. And as we have seen, a fresh examination of the minutes reveals that the lodge, using the old name of St. George l'Observance and working with the Herodom chapter under the charter of the Perfect l'Observance number 1, continued well into the 1790s. The final minute entry being the aforementioned minute of 1794. So this last minute entry also signifies that the lodge was still using the original charter of the Perfect l'Observance and was effectively operating not only as an independent lodge, but was keeping the name of the Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent alive, at least for a few more years. So now let's move on to the 7 degrees and what the 7 degrees were actually about. So Wanacott named the individual 7 degrees that were practiced in the chapter that was attached to the Union Lodge, the Lodge of St. George l'Observance and the Lodge of Perfect l'Observance. These have some similarities to the Rite of Baldwin, or the Baldwin Rite, and are presented as thus. The first 3 degrees are the 3 craft degrees. The 4th degree is given the name of Elu, which included a selection of unnumbered grades, including Architect, Prévôt Judge, Grand Architect, Compagnon de la Royal Arche, and Grand Élio, Sublime Maître, and the final grade of Perfect Écossais. The 5th degree was called Chevalier d'Orient et d'Occident, and the 6th degree, Chevalier de l'Aigle Pélican, Rose Croix de Saint-André, Le Herodom, Triple Croix. or in short, the Chevalier Rose Croix. The seventh and final degree is listed as Kadosh. As we shall see in the part 3 of my work, of my new book, there was a large section of ritual entitled Chevalier, which appears to encompass a number of Chevalier grades. And Wonnacott also noted how the Templar series were combined with the Kadosh. So basically what that was presenting was a condensed set of grades and degrees under the Chevalier theme. So we have the Rose Croix, Knights Templar grades, and finally culminating in the Kadosh at the very end, which makes the rite different to the French rite. If anyone's familiar with the French rite, that ends with the Rose Croix. Delinto's Rite of 7 Degrees, even though it was French, ended with Kadosh. So there's still a relationship, but there's obviously a difference, a major difference there in respect to the evolution of this particular rite. So another list of the degrees are given by Delinto in correspondence to the Royal Order of Scotland in 1782. And this was transcribed initially by G.S. Draffen in his paper for AQC in 1955. And this differs slightly to the degrees that Wonnacott put forward and are presented thus. So the first degree is comprised of the actual 3 craft degrees: the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the symbolic master. The second degree also has 3 grades: the little elected, the inconnu, and the elect of 15. The third degree has the architect, the judge, and the grand architect. The fourth degree is the Royal Arch. The fifth degree includes the Knights of the East and Princes of Jerusalem. The sixth degree is a Herodom degree, a Templar degree, and a Rose Croix degree. And the seventh degree is a Kadosh degree and another Templar degree, which probably rounds everything off, concludes everything. So they're actually divided up into 3 sections as well. So the first 3 degrees are the first section. The next 3 degrees are the second section, and the 7th and final degree is the 3rd section. So 3 whole sections to the right. So certainly the journey presented by the rite has similarities to the Masonic journey displayed in the Rite of Strict Observance, a 7-degree rite that was also Templar orientated and had Écossais themes or Scottish themes. Indeed, similarities can also be observed with the Melissino rite, especially in the 7th degree pathway structure and with the occurrence of the Scottish master grade. Both of these rites operated on the continent during the 18th century and reveal the importance of the use of 7 degrees in conveying the Masonic story. And they certainly form part of a wider family tree of 7-degree rites from that period. The 7 degrees of Delinto's rite was structured as having a number of grades compacted into a degree. And the 7 degrees themselves were also divided up into 3 sections. The first being the light of the law of Moses, comprising the first 5 degrees of the rite, and the second section being the second light upon the law of Christ, which consisted of the 6th degree, and the third and final section being the light upon nature, which contained the 7th and ultimate degree. So basically what we've got there is this kind of development of the degrees where it's progressing. So hence we get these different types and different names of the grades within the degree structure itself. So we can actually see with the Rite of 7 Degrees that over the years, from when it was transplanted into England in 1766, it's progressed and it's changed and transformed, which is very interesting because we're actually looking at how a rite progresses and transforms itself. So it's very, very interesting type of rite, really, you know, and gives us an insight into this development. Right. So now we have, if we go into the first section of the Light of the Law of Moses, and this begins what we recognize as the first 3 craft degrees, which were classed as one complete degree in the rite. And Delinto wrote that this degree revealed the signs, symbols, sacred words, and passwords. The second degree of the rite is listed as revealing the murderers of the master, telling of their punishment and the burial of Hiram. As the Masonic story continues, the third degree has the architects eating a portion of the heart of Hiram, as ordered from Solomon himself. Something which is reminiscent of symbolically eating the flesh of Christ, but also signifies how the old master lives on within the new. So the judges and provost are also elected to prevent future discord during the perfection of the temple. And the fourth degree is that of the royal arch, where the name of God is discovered, which is followed by the fifth degree being Knights of the East. And here we have the reconstruction of the temple after 70 years of captivity, led by Zerubbabel, and the deliverance of the Jewish people by Cyrus. The next section, entitled Second Light Upon the Law of Christ, begins with the sixth degree, which Delinto names as the Royal Order of Herodom in his letter to the Royal Order of Scotland. A degree that dramatically takes us into the Crusades of the Holy Land. And this letter also mentions the voyage of the 3 columns of faith, hope, and charity, along with research of the word, lost by the death of Christ, the descent into the limbs of hell, the delivering of the souls, his resurrection, and the word being found again. Delinto describes the 9 crusades. He introduces Godfrey de Bouillon to the ritual narrative and mentions the antique Lodge of Scotland that was established in the castle of Herodom, which was, as Delinto states, took on several names according to the revolutions and wars. So there we have even Delinto putting forward that there are several names, and things change a lot. So I think that was Delinto's way of just saying, just reminding people that things can change. So it's very interesting, you know, the whole language of the minutes, the letters, and the ritual. Very, very interesting look at how a ritual can develop, a rite can develop. So this section, as the title suggests, focuses on Christ's death and his resurrection, and also how the word was lost and found again. In essence, like Hiram in the previous section, the second segment covers the death of Christ, the Master. Parallels can certainly be seen here, especially with the word being lost and found, and in the eating of a portion of the heart of Hiram by the new Master in the architect's degree, which reminds us of the never-ending cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The third and final section, entitled The Third Light Upon Nature, concludes the rite with a final 7th degree. And Delinto mentions 7 sections, 7 sacred words, and 7 seals, and books of Masons. The letter refers to this degree as the Royal Order of Templars Kadosh, and Godfrey of Bouillon is again brought into the ritual narrative as King of Jerusalem. Jacques de Molay is featured, and the Master's cruel death is firmly blamed on Pope Clement here, with Delinto unwilling to displease the King of France for his death. In fact, Delinto goes further and states that the popes have never been assisted by the Holy Ghost, which certainly produces an anti-Catholic stance for the rite. The Masonic story continues by saying that upon the destruction of the Templar Order in the years 1312 and 1314, the Knights Templar took refuge in Scotland, so the secret knowledge thus survived. This knowledge seems to have included the knowledge of the salts of Hermes, the separation of four elements, the real philosophical stone of mathematics, astrology, and all the sciences. There is also a strange mention of the Lodge of Cromwell. This completes the Masonic story held within de Linto's Rite, a story that comprises a mystical journey and tells of the continuation of sacred knowledge, knowledge that is passed down through the ages and is only given to the initiated. Wonnacott did remark that there were variants in regards to the names and grades of the 7-degree rite. And indeed, there is a slightly different variation of the rite held in the archives of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. So I'll just mention these now. The different rite of 7 degrees. So the first degrees are the 3 craft degrees. The second degree is the Petit Elu Inconnu, or Elu Inconnu, and Elu de Coins. The third degree is Architect, Provost and Judge, and Grand Architect. The fourth degree is Royal Arch. The fifth degree is Knight of the East, Grand Commander and Prince of Jerusalem. The sixth degree is Knight of the Eagle, Rose Croix. And the seventh and final degree comprises of the Knights of the East and West, Knights of the Triple Croix, Knights of Palestine, Templars, Knight of the Sun, the Physical, Philosophical and Moral College of Herodom Kol Kadosh, otherwise known as the Knight of the Black Eagle. So the list of degrees here definitely resounds Wonnacott's statement that there may be variants. And as we mentioned before, we can see here how things are changing and progressing and transforming at different stages of the rite's development. And indeed, Wonnacott goes on to state that undoubtedly additions or rearrangements were made at intervals. The final degree here, containing a grade called Kadosh, otherwise referred to as the Knight of the Black Eagle, is worthy of note as it is reminiscent of Arthur Edward Waite's description of the mysterious Rite of the Black Eagle in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, which was published around about 1901. Some of the grades that were worked in the Rite of 7 degrees are strikingly similar to ones found in Richard Carlisle's Manual of Freemasonry, most notably the degree of Architect, Grand Architect, Provost and Judge, and Knights of the White Eagle or Pelican, also known as the Knights of the Rosy Cross of St. Andrew, which certainly reveals a continued interest in some of de Linto's grades into the early 19th century. And that's something that I go on to discuss later on in the book, and also with the previous book, Rediscovered Rituals. So furthermore, John Yarker had included the Rose Choir and Kadosh rituals in his collection of old Lancashire rituals that were dated to 1865. And this also likewise hints at a continued interest in these high degrees. So just to conclude, what we have there is basically the Rite of 7 degrees, which was progressing. It was a progressive rite. It was transforming, altering itself slightly as it went through the ages from 1766 to at least 1794. And it wasn't a dead end as such. It evolved into many different kind of outlets, really. We can see with the Manual of Freemasonry with Richard Carlisle, who he published that first as an expose in his journal, The Republican, in 1825. He includes some of those degrees that were mentioned in the rite, that were clearly practiced in the Rite of 7 degrees, and so they still had some meaning at that particular time. They were still floating around somewhere, and we have proof that in certain encampments, Knights Templar encampments, they were practicing some of those degrees, the Rose Choir in particular. So it wasn't an evolutionary dead end. You know, it did some of those degrees that were practiced in the Rite of 7 degrees were cherry picked and could be found later on. The other thing of interest as well, just in conclusion, the Royal Order of Scotland, Lambert de Linto, Pierre Lambert de Linto, wrote to the Royal Order of Scotland seeking a charter, and he actually obtained one from them. He actually obtained a charter from the Royal Order of Scotland. So basically, he had two charters. One which was under the Grand Lodge of All England south of the River Trent, and another charter that was with the Royal Order of Scotland. So he had his feet in two camps there, probably just in case. So it shows that de Linto was eager to reach out, not just to obtain charters, but his particular interest in the Royal Order of Scotland was because the Rite itself had Scottish themes. They were working the Rose Croix, Kadosh, and he was seeking out this old Scottish tradition, really, and also within that was a fresh charter as well. So it's very interesting, and it was good for me because obviously these letters survive as well. So and they were transcribed in AQC back in the 50s, the 1950s. So it was a great book to do, a great book to put together. It's divided up into 3 parts. Part 1, where this extract came from, discusses Pierre Lambert de Linto, the Rite of 7 Degrees, the history behind the rite. Part 2 examines the art behind the rite, because Pierre Lambert de Linto was indeed an engraver, he was an artist, and his engravings give a window into his esoteric mind, really, which is fascinating. And part 3 of the book is the transcribed minutes and transcribed ritual, which is fascinating. And I present them in both French and English as well. So it's a fantastic book to do, really revealing, gives a great insight into a Masonic rite that was transforming before your very eyes, really, so it's fascinating. So thank you for listening, and I'll turn it over to our host for any questions.